My name is Dylan McFry, and I'm here to walk you through a video that details my work on the module concerning individualized pathways for students. I will begin by detailing 4 specific resources I found online that helped me get a better understanding of individualized pathways. The first resource number 1, is the article from prodigygame.com, 20 differentiated instruction strategies and examples. I liked this resource very much. It helped me a lot because of the very title itself. It provides several different strategies and examples for how to implement differentiated instruction in our teaching. And this was invaluable in helping to show me new and interesting ways that I could coach students toward mastery based off of their achievement levels, such as creating learning stations, task cards, interviewing students. That was something I've used before, but I never really considered it in the context of coaching students towards mastery. So I like any article or any resource that provides how to use this examples. That's definitely a resource that is going to help me out a lot. Resource number 2 was from elearningindustry.com, an article titled 7 Tips to Create Personal Learning Paths in E-Learning. This is a especially topical article, simply because due to the pandemic, we've had a lot of instances this semester or this whole last year or two in school, in which we've had to go hybrid or fully online. So learning different tips for how to navigate the e-learning spectrum was crucial in helping me continue to teach my students in times of school upheaval. So this was great in giving me tips on how to do that and how to affirm and empower my students to continue learning even if we weren't in the school building. Resource number 3 was titled Promoting Personalization Through Learner Pathways. This was crucial in helping me understand personalizing learner pathways. And what I really liked about this article, it starts off by giving you not only ideas of what the student is going to be doing, but also what the teacher is doing and what technology is going to provide. So it gives the job description of what teachers are going to do in making individualized pathways. It says what students are going to be doing and how they're going to navigate having different avenues for displaying mastery of content. And finally, it explains what role technology itself is going to play. So this was a useful resource. And finally, to wrap up my resources, resource number 4 was the article from the PL Toolbox, Personalized Learning Pathways. And this resource was very good for breaking the process of creating these individualized pathways down into beginner/developing and also into the next level, sort of the practicing/achieving level. So it shows you how to start out and different methods and techniques to use when beginning this process. And then it shows you also, once you're more comfortable with it, once yourself and also your students are more comfortable with the process, you can go on to more strategies and techniques that are on a more advanced level. So those were 4 useful resources. I want to now provide evidence of how I planned with 2 students to create individualized pathways for them. And the tool that I used this was from the Schoology platform, which I've talked about in previous videos, specifically a quiz that my class recently took. It was a 5-question quiz over Punnett squares, since my biology class is currently learning about genetics. And what I was able to use with this CFA, or a common formative assessment, I created this assessment with 2 other biology teachers. We sat down and we created this 5-question quiz, and we then tracked the data based off of which students missed which question and how they scored overall. So based off of this one assessment, we could then create individualized learning pathways depending on how students scored on the assessment. For example, we would have a different pathway here for this student here, Abner, who scored a perfect 100 out of 100, who obviously has a great grasp of Punnett squares. He can move on to a more advanced assignment or a project-based display assignment, versus you have a student like Jackson who scored a 40 out of 100. Obviously, Jackson is going to require a little bit more help in his path towards mastery. So he would move on to an assignment that helps him review in greater detail. So that is how I would then use this to plan with these students and create their own pathways forward. Jackson would review more versus Abner, who would then have the opportunity to move on to an assignment where he could display his content, or display his mastery of the content in a more in-depth way. Finally, I'm going to wrap up this video. I have 3 artifacts for 2 different subjects. The first 3 artifacts are going to deal with my using previous data to move students forward. And the first option I'm going to use for this is actually the resource I have pulled up. So the first artifact I have is this common formative assessment of Punnett squares. I use the results of this common formative assessment to then create pathways for each student moving forward. So the students that scored, say, 40 or below, 60 or below, the ones that did not pass, would go on to one assignment and review the content more, versus students who made 80s and 100s. They would then move on to more project-based learning and different, more in-depth ways to display the knowledge that they already have. Another artifact that I would use for this, I will then move to the Test Quizzes Projects folder on Schoology. The second artifact I have is actually the recent test that we took over meiosis and genetics. Similar to that quiz, I use the results of this test to determine which students need to continue to work with a certain topic and which students are ready to move on. So you see we have a wide range of scores here, from some failures and some excelled. For a failure example, we have a 42.86 for an Oliver. Oliver's path would then be more geared towards continuing to review genetics, continuing to review meiosis and Punnett squares, versus a student such as, say, Vinia, who made an 85.71. Vinia seems to display a high mastery level of the content, so Vinia would then be prepared to move on to our next section. So she would already begin to work with introduction activities that deal with our next topic, which is protein synthesis in DNA. And finally, I'm going to move over to an example from my physics class, still on Schoology here. We had a quiz earlier in the semester that covered the concept of metric conversions. And again, just like the others, I would use the results of this metric conversion quiz to determine who needed to continue to review and who was ready to move on. And as you can see from the results of this, we had some students miss the quiz and still need to make it up all these months later. But overall, you see there was a very high average on this quiz, so it showed that all the students were grasping unit conversions, and as such, we were then able to move forward with content. So to wrap this video up, finally, I have 3 more artifacts, this time to show you examples specifically of how I coached learners towards specific individualized mastery of content. I'm moving back now to the Punnett square quiz I showed earlier. So my first artifact is this Punnett square quiz. So for instance, I use 2 students as examples. Say Jackson here made a 40. So it's obvious Jackson needs more help. So Jackson moves on to the assignment that he will complete, which is genetics practice. He will spend some time working some more with phenotypes and genotypes, what it means for inheritance and traits being passed down. So he would spend time practicing and working through this worksheet with groups of other students who struggled on the assessment. Versus, you have a student, say, like Abner here, who made 100. Abner would then move on to a more in-depth assignment, such as this character cross, in which students take 2 cartoon characters, make up the traits they want to use, make up genotypes for them, and then draw 5 Punnett squares, and end up creating a baby, which they will then draw based off of using these 2 cartoon characters as characters, or as parents, rather. So this is a much more in-depth application-based assignment. This would obviously be for a student to use on their pathway if they were showing great grasp of the content, versus a student who needed more review who would move on to this one. My second artifact for that would be an artifact, or an article assignment that I used for my biology class. Station work is a great way to coach students towards mastery and provide a pathway for them. So this would be a great opportunity to use in class. We had cell growth and division stations, and students moved throughout the room, and they can only move on to the next station once they displayed mastery of the station they currently were working on. So if a student was here, they were started to make a flip book over mitosis, if they completed the interface section, included all the labelings they were supposed to have, I would have to check it off and say that they were fine before they then moved on to the next station. So this was a great opportunity for me to coach learners towards mastery. They could not move on until they had proven that they were able to display mastery. The third and final artifact I have is a genetics project, and this is a good artifact to use for coaching learners towards mastery because students were given the opportunity to display mastery in different ways. The students were choosing a different genetic disorder to use, and they were answering all these questions about them, And they were given the opportunity to display mastery in different ways. Some students could use a PowerPoint, some could use a poster, some could use a brochure or a video. So based off of a student's achievement level, I could then recommend different aspects for them to use. Students who are struggling more, I might recommend PowerPoint because most students are very familiar with how to use it. It's much more basic as far as it's just listing facts and putting them in one place. Versus there are other students who might be achieving more, I might let them do a poster in which they can use their artistic ability and they can use their ability to organize. Or if we have students who are more outgoing and are more used to public speaking, I might recommend for them to use a video. Or if they have more in-depth knowledge of technology. So those are 3 artifacts for coaching students toward content mastery. I provided 3 artifacts about using previous data to move students forward in their content mastery. And finally, I included 4 resources that help me understand individualized pathways more. And I also included the evidence of planning with 2 students to move them forward in the class. So thank you so much for listening.